Are there too many stats in the modern game? Why do we keep using them? And what do people use them for? Hello, I'm Wayne and welcome to Goals by the Numbers. Let's get straight into it. So, with the premise of this channel, the whole point is to include statistics, metrics that are in and around the game of football, especially when we're looking at the Premier League. However, it has dawned on me that some metrics just may not be known to the group. And the one easy way to get around that would be to make a video that we can all refer to in our time of need, question, want, desire, and refer to it. So, in today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of positions that footballers play in. And I'm also going to mention 3 metrics for each of those positions, so we can kind of gauge what each position should be doing. So, for example, a centre-back wouldn't be expected to have a high XG, simply because they aren't close enough to the opposition goal to take enough shots to warrant the value. Whereas a striker would be expected to have a high XG and probably be expected to have the bare minimum PSXG. So, our first position, that being of a goalkeeper. So, what is important to a goalkeeper? OPA, or offensive actions, usually used per 90, can indicate to us if a goalkeeper is more of a sweeper keeper or a traditional shot stopper. Another metric that will be useful for goalkeepers is PSXG. Now that is the post-shot expected goals. So how many shots are goalkeepers facing, and of those shots, how many does the metric think should have been goals? So for example, if a goalkeeper has conceded 5 goals, but their PSXG is 10, then we know that they've saved 5 more shots than they should have. The last, or of the top 3 for goalkeepers, would be save percentage. Why that metric is useful is if we have one goalkeeper, say at Manchester City, Ederson, and then we have another goalkeeper at, say, Leicester last season, one is facing more shots than the other. But to make an equal comparison, we can look at their save percentage. Maybe Ederson at Manchester City is facing 2 shots a game and 1 goes in. Maybe the goalkeeper at Leicester, whose name escapes me, is facing 10 shots a game and 3 of those go in. So, purely in the save percentage, which one actually is better? This is the whole point. So on to our next position, that being centre back. So the first of the metrics that are, I would say, the first of the top 3 that are important to a centre back would be aerial duels won as a percentage. So if you're an attacking team and you notice that the opposition centre backs don't tend to win many balls in the air, what would you do? You would simply just keep crossing the ball or lofting balls into the box, knowing that the centre-backs aren't going to win them. So, for example, to use Manchester United, they have Harry Maguire, who seems to love and thrive on a challenge in the air. But opposed to that, you have Victor Lindelof, who doesn't seem to be as keen. So if Maguire's not playing, you know that with Lindelof, you can just put a few more balls in the air, and he is likely to struggle more. Not that he can't do it, but just the percentage of him struggling is higher. And those are the kind of marginal gains that will take you from potentially a draw to a win. Another metric that would be good for centre-backs, or in this case, is 3. So clearances, interceptions, and blocks. Most of defenders' time is spent preventing the other team scoring. So with these metrics, clearances, how many times they've just got the ball away from the box. Blocks, blocking passes, blocking shots, always useful. And interceptions. Being able to get control of a loose ball can then force to use Americanism, a turnover, or, to stick to a relevant term, a counter-attack. You have one player who's given the ball away, and he's obviously intending to pass the ball to another player. Intercepting that ball potentially means both of those players could now be out of position to prevent the defender who's got the ball from starting a counter-attack. And the last metric that I decided on is progressive passes. So now that we are in the day and age of playing out the back, centre-backs are now more prone to making more passes, and of those passes, the progressive ones show which teams are better at retaining possession of the ball. If you're passing the ball between centre-back to centre-back, the progressive passes in terms of distance and in number doesn't tend to grow. But if your team is more attacking, think Virgil van Dijk, then progressive passes becomes quite an important metric. So on to our next position. We're going to call it fullback / wingback, because essentially the roles, it's not the same, it has different names, but they're similarish to share the same metrics between the two. So, the first metric I decided on was progressive carries. In the modern day, fullbacks and wingbacks are expected to provide width in most cases, unless they invert, which means progressing the ball, running down the ring, or even running inside to add to the amount of centre midfielders that are there temporarily because of a system. And without doing that, you potentially have a player who's not providing an outlet. So for example, if you have two fullbacks or wingbacks who don't have many progressive carries, and the wingers who tuck in, that means no one's running with the ball forward. No one's dribbling. That would look strange in most teams. The next metric is crosses into the box, or just crosses. If you're carrying the ball, and as a fullback or wingback, the assumption is you're carrying it out wide, crossing it would also be an interesting metric to denote the fullbacks who are just more attacking. Running with the ball is all great. If you're handing it off, it means that someone else needs to be out there to cross, and then what is the fullback doing? If the fullback is doing the crossing as well, more players can spend more time getting in the box and trying to score goals. And the last two metrics for fullbacks and wingbacks would be tackles and interceptions. Now, depending on how the team plays, you could argue that traditionally the thought of fullbacks and or wingbacks is that they are technically or arguably defensive players. So their tackling and interceptions would be important. In the modern day where wingers or inside forwards tend to cut in, your fullback or wingback could be the only player providing any width at all. So not only are they responsible for getting forward and attacking, they're also responsible for running backwards and defending too. So that takes us on to our next position. Let's go with central midfielders. Now you have two types. We're going to break it down into two types. Attacking central midfielders, or ones that are more of an attacking persuasion, and then defensive central midfielders, ones that are more of a defensive persuasion. Nice and simple, right? Okay, so defensive central midfielders. Three metrics that would be important to them would be, first two we'll go with will be tackles and interceptions. Primarily as a defensive player, their job will be to protect the defence, be that back four, back five, back three, whatever combination that is. So that means winning the ball by taking from someone else, physically, or intercepting a pass to regain possession and then recycle possession and give it off to one of your teammates. Another metric that would be important for this position would be pass completion percentage. The deeper you are on the football pitch, or rather the closer you are towards your own goal, the more important it is to not lose the ball. Because if you lose the ball 20 yards from your goal, a player could conceivably shoot from that position. If you lose the ball 70 yards from your goal, that's a good distance that ball's got to travel before it gets into the back of your net. So as a defensive central midfielder, pass completion percentage is actually really important. And the last metric would be progressive passes. It would be progressive passes because as a defensive player, you win the ball, you protect the defense, and once you get the ball, what do you do with the ball? Simple as that. I suppose the most simplistic way to explain it would be if a player in the midfield protects the defense, tackles a player, he gets up, he has control of the ball. He could do multiple things. He could kick it off the pitch, make no sense. He could start to run, which would be fine, depending on his space, and it's a good decision. Or what he could do would be to pass the ball to one of the more offensive-minded players via a progressive pass. And that takes us nicely on to the next position, which would be a offensive central midfielder, and the metrics that they would find key. Still the top three. We're still going to work it well. Well, we say top three, but sometimes you have to kind of combine a few because they're all still relevant in what they do. But I digress. So, offensive central midfielder. The first metric I would mention would be XA, or expected assists. As an offensive-minded player, you would be expected to contribute to the team scoring goals. So, passing the ball to a player to essentially have a shot in the hopes of scoring. Another metric would be key passes. So essentially, similar to assists, are you making the vital passes or are you just knocking the ball around aimlessly? I shouldn't say aimlessly. Or are you just passing the ball around trying to retain possession before someone else makes the key pass? And the last one being shot creating action. So that would be your involvement in the build-up before a shot is taken. I think I'm correct in thinking that the pass before the pass that leads to a shot means that you can register, or both players register, one shot creating action. Yes, that's right. So that takes us on to our next position, that being an inside forward / inverted winger. Now, these are your quote-unquote wide players. The role they've played over the last, since the beginning of the Premier League, the role that they've played has changed so much over the years. You've had your Jack Grealishes, which tend to cut in, create and score. You've got your Mo Salahs, which are just absolute ruthless goal machines. You've had your Ray Parlers, who'd run down the wing and cross the ball. You've had your Ryan Giggses, tricky wingers, dribbling, crossing, scoring goals, running from the halfway line at Villa Park and scoring against David Seaman kind of wingers. And in the modern day, they tend to lean more towards the Mo Salah kind of model. So the first metric that would be important to them would be the overall term would be considered goal contributions. And by that, what we would do is we would combine the XG, expected goals, with the XA, expected assists. So our idea would be, as a wide player, you would score a few goals, score a few assists, and we would then look at a whole number. So for example, if Mohamed Salah scored 30 goals and got 10 assists, his goal contribution would be 40. So you'd look at Liverpool in the Premier League table and you'd say, okay, he has been involved in 40 of those goals directly. And if they scored 100, you know that he's been very impactful for that team. Another metric that would be important to wide players would be carries into the penalty area. So we can track, there is a metric to track how many times a player is bringing a ball into a different segment of the pitch, and carrying the ball into the penalty area essentially would line you up to be a player who's getting a possible shot creating action or goal creating action because you're quite likely to get assists. You're in the box of the opposition. And those are the kind of players who tend to get a good amount of goals because they're just carrying the ball into the box and it's dangerous. The last metric I would pick for this position would be progressive passes received. So, as the ball moves up the pitch, you've got your, I guess, how do we describe it in terms that are not too threatening? The players who are going to get the goals and the assists, it's interesting to see how many progressive passes they're receiving, because from that we can figure out, as the team plays, are they being told or instructed to give the ball to a particular person, or does the natural dynamic of the team just result in a particular player getting the ball all the time via the progressive passes received? Yeah, that's it. So that takes us on to our last position, the striker, or the forward, or attacker, or whatever you want to call it, I guess, these days. I'll stick with striker. That kind of works in my head. Again, my age, who knows. So, first and foremost, striker, first metric, XG. How many goals is the striker expected to score? Now, a really bad, well, not bad explanation. How to explain XG. So, data has been recorded over a period of time, and they are able to work out if a player takes a shot from a certain position on the pitch, the expectation that that shot can result in a goal is a value of X. That value could be as high as 1 or as low as 0.1. But a 0.1 XG can result in a goal, and a 1 XG can result in a goal not being scored. So when we think of things like how effective a striker really is, essentially what that striker wants to do is beat the XG score. Because that means that of all of the chances they were provided, or all of the chances that they had, did they overperform it or underperform it? If you overperformed it, happy days, you're doing well. If you underperformed it, there are questions. And you don't want questions as a striker. The next metric would be goals per shot on target. Per 90, not per 90. Actually more per 90. This will tell you how many shots on target the striker is taking before they score a goal. Why is that important? You could have a player who needs 5 shots on goal to score a goal. So essentially, you need to make sure that person doesn't have 5 chances. At that point, they're likely to have gotten a goal. There are some players who maybe just need 2 shots on goal and they're getting 1. And of course, as a defence, you are going to have to work harder to prevent them from getting that 1 chance. So the last metric I would pick for the strikers would be touches into the penalty area, or touches in the penalty area. Why that would be important would indicate to me in a match how often the players in the opposition box. The more they're in the box would tell me that the more that their team's attacking, and I would expect them or a couple of their teammates to have got a goal. I mean, otherwise why are they touching the ball in the box, right? So, now that we've had the conversation and we've spoken about a series of metrics for each position, now, of course, you might get a defender who tends to get a lot of assists or goals. That can happen, of course, that can happen. But what this then allows us to do is we can look at metrics on a position, and then we can compare 2 players and come to a conclusion. So, for example, Liverpool have recently purchased Jeremy Frimpong. Really good player. Looks really great on the YouTube highlights. Really great. But in real life looks really good too. Now, so Frimpong is, I suppose, essentially going to replace Trent Alexander-Arnold. But for simplicity, let's just assume it's a direct replacement. So Frimpong replaces Trent Alexander-Arnold. He goes straight into the team. Okay, happy days. Over the last season, Frimpong's stats, or his top 3 stats, indicate that he is good at, or he has high touches in the opponent's area, progressive passes received, which if you remember was something we attributed to wingers, and he also has a high XG when penalties are not included. And you think, okay, fine, that's what he's good at. But then when you look at Trent Alexander-Arnold, well, he's good at changes. So Trent has, his high stats were XAG, so expected assists he was getting, the amount of shots, so the amount of shots he was taking, and progressive passes, as opposed to Frimpong, whose progressive passes received. So what is this, looking at that from a statistical point of view, what do we think is going to happen? Well, a really simplistic view would be that instead of Trent, who's crossing the ball a lot into the box, you're going to get a right wing back or right back who's going to be running. And I mean running down that flank. And how will that impact Liverpool as a team? So, I guess simplistically you could say, and because of the way they're going to play, because they're so good, Frimpong is effectively going to be a winger. And what I would expect to see would be if Mo Salah starts on the right wing or as the right wide player, as Frimpong starts to run, I'd expect to see Salah step inside and have Frimpong on the outside to do all of the running. So I'd expect to see Salah, and I don't mean this as in less work, but as his age is getting on, I'd expect to see him utilising the runs of Frimpong more so he can focus on his impact, as in, I'm going to work myself into a position where I can then switch it on and try and be most impactful by taking a shot or score a goal. Now, if we didn't know the stats or didn't have any stats that we think a player in a certain position would have, we may not have realised there's a slight nuance in that difference. So next year playing against Liverpool, you really need to be careful of that guy on that right back running down your wing. And as soon as Mo Salah steps in, who's now tracking him? I think he's going to score another boatload of goals next season. It's going to be difficult for someone to catch Liverpool. As long as Salah stays fit, is the AFCON next season? I don't know. So they might lose him for like a month. And previously on the channel, we've asked the question, are Liverpool reliant on Mo Salah? Simple answer. Yes and no. Why yes? The system dictates that one player is going to be effectively the main guy and score the goals. Why no? If Salah isn't doing it, I think Luis Diaz is going to start doing it. I think he's going to do it in a big way. In fact, I think as Salah gets older, I'd expect to see Diaz's numbers going up. I think Liverpool already have their Salah replacement in the squad. Just a case of if he starts scoring the goals, we just have to wait and see. So, what do you guys think? Now that we know what stats we can attribute to certain players, does it make more sense? Does it need to be a more in-depth piece, or can we just say, no, we know, we understand, that player should be doing this, that player should be doing that, they've now made a change with that player and he's good at this instead of that, so we now know what we're doing. Anyway, catch you soon, comments down below, enjoy the rest of your day.